All right. Good morning, everyone. How's everyone feeling? Doing good? I'm excited to be here. I've never been to Primavera before, coming here from New York. So, very exciting. Thank you all for being here for the very first presentation of the conference, getting up early. You made it. Good job. Round of applause for everyone here. Awesome. So I'm Tatiana Cirisano. I'm a music industry analyst at MIDiA Research. And if you don't know anything about MIDiA, we're a music industry research and consulting based out of London. But we really think of ourselves as not just a data company. We think of ourselves as an ideas company. So what we're always trying to do with our research is help the music industry kind of peer behind the horizon of the big shifts that are coming next for the industry and what that means for you. So that's what we're going to do today. Let me see if this gets set up. Oops. Wait a second for that. So yeah, that's what we're going to do today is I'm going to bring you through our latest big picture thinking, which is something that we're calling bifurcation theory. And this is essentially the idea that the cracks in the foundations of the traditional industry are leading us to a place where the new business is bifurcating into two separate consumer worlds. One is the sort of lean back, passive experience of streaming, and the other is the more active, lean forward experience of social media. So we'll go through more of what that means. I'm going to speak for about 35 minutes, and then we'll have some time to answer some questions, and I'll also be around after if anyone wants to discuss any of this. So let's get straight into it. If you have been a conscious being in the music industry for the past year, you'll know that we're at a major tipping point in the business with all of these new factors coming in. This obsession with music superfans, AI coming in and disrupting things, reaching a breaking point with data and what that can do for finding and breaking artists. And the reality is, every 10 years or so, the music business is always going to go through one of these big shifts. But the difference is that in the past, new in the industry or new eras have usually been tied to format shifts, right? So we'll go from CDs to downloads, that gave way to streaming. But now we're at a point where we're not really seeing a new format come through. Instead, the major shift that we're seeing, bringing in this new era, is more about dealing with the order impacts of streaming, all of the things that streaming has changed about the way that people interact with music. So let's take a look at what that means. So all of the cracks in the foundation of the traditional industry are things that you'll probably be familiar with. Maybe these are things that you deal with in your own work. So first, we have the fragmentation of culture. So essentially, now that there's so many places that people can access music, they can listen to whatever they want on demand across the world. And on top of that, you also have algorithms that are driving people deeper into their niches. We're at this point where it's hard to actually see a mainstream anymore, right? It feels like everyone is kind of in their own niche of content, and something that is a superstar in one corner of the internet might be totally unheard of in another. So we're at this point where, there isn't that much of a mainstream, things are super fragmented. Also, in the streaming era, just because of the way that music is presented, we've come to this place where there's a focus on songs and singles rather than albums and artists. And social media has only accentuated that. And then we have the growth of the independent side and what the industry refers to as the long tail of lots of creators that are releasing their music on streaming, and many of those aren't even being listened to. And that has contributed to everyone being dissatisfied with streaming royalties, right? It's no longer just the independent artists and the long tail that are frustrated. It's even the biggest players in the industry are saying, because the streaming royalty pool is getting divided between so many more artists and rights holders these days, nobody is really happy with what they're getting paid. And then on top of that, you have the fact that streaming subscription growth is slowing as streaming reaches its saturation in established markets like the US. So those are all the cracks in the foundation. But sort of as a reaction to these things, we're seeing the start of new foundations building towards a new industry. And there's a lot of things happening here. There's the growth of scenes and very small niches of entertainment because of happening. There's a focus on fans and not just audiences, because we know it's getting harder and harder to build these massive audiences that would create streaming success. Many artists are changing strategy to focus more on how can I reach my core fans and monetize them, as is the rest of the industry. And then finally, fan creation as entertainment. So this, to me, is the single most sort of transformative thing that has happened to the music industry in the past 5 or 10 years, is that increasingly audiences don't just want to passively consume the music that they're fans of. They want to play around with it. They want to interact with it. They want to post a TikTok video or post a cover or do all these things that are way more than just passively consuming. And they're starting to create content as just a form of entertainment themselves, which is something we're going to talk about more, and I'll show you some data around. Now, we're, 5 minutes into the presentation, and I have to already mention AI because, of course, this is the biggest thing on everyone's minds right now. So at MIDiA, we see AI as really, rather than being something that is creating new trends in the industry, we're seeing it as majorly just accelerating trends that were already happening. So basically accelerating everything on the left side here. Because there's way more music being created and released, there's way more artists in the system, royalties are getting divided between more people, everyone's more dissatisfied, the music listening is fragmenting even further, and AI is also, of course, the tool that's enabling a lot of the fan creation that we're seeing. So we see AI really as an accelerant of all of these things that we're talking about. But this shift isn't going to happen overnight. So we also have some sort of countermeasures, things that are holding this change back slightly or just kind of slowing that overall shift. And there's two things I want to point out here. One is two-tier licensing. So this is, as you might have seen or read about, the new way that Spotify is distributing streaming royalties, where tracks that have under 1,000 streams in the last year are not receiving any royalties at all. And that is a measure to sort of slow down the impact that the rising number of artists releasing music is having, because it means that the royalties are getting divided between fewer people than they were before, and fewer rights holders than before. And then we also just have with AI the fact that it's going to take a long time, maybe years, maybe a decade, for the legislation to develop around how copyright works with AI, with generative AI, with assistive AI, with all these things. So these are kind of slowing down the change. But this is the sort of map, I guess, of what we're going to talk about today and how we think things are changing in the industry. So we're going to go through this in 3 parts. First, I'm going to talk about and share some data on the shifts we're seeing in music creators. And then we're going to shift focus to consumers. And then at the end, I'm going to bring it all together and talk about this bifurcation theory that we're here for. So with creators, every year we do a survey where we survey hundreds of music creators around the globe, and we ask them all sorts of questions about their work. And we always ask them about what success looks like for them, how they define success. And traditionally, success in the music industry was all kind of about, fame and fortune, right? It was about becoming a superstar, reaching millions of people, and being really rich. Whereas now, because it's getting so much harder to break through and reach that sort of mainstream stardom, and so many artists struggling to earn meaningful revenue from streaming, many artists are actually shifting their definitions of success more towards having a sustainable income and earning money from their biggest fans, having a core group of supporters and being able to monetize that, rather than needing to try and scale these massive, huge audiences, right? So we find that the most popular definition of success is moving people with music, even if that's only a small number of people, followed by making a career out of music. So simply just having a sustainable income is so important. Being heard by as many people as possible doesn't necessarily mean being super famous, as only 21% of professionals actually say they strive to be famous. And finally, being recognized and respected in my scene. So once you know this about what creators are striving for today, how they define success, you start to think about, okay, how do partners fit into this? Because so many artists are feeling like no matter what they do, all of the effort that they're putting into streaming, trying to get on playlists, releasing lots of music, trying to focus all their efforts on marketing towards streaming, is not having that much of an impact on their revenue, because they're still collecting pretty small payments from streaming revenue. So in order to do all of these things, in order to reach their fans, try and monetize them, build a sustainable income. So many artists are having to go beyond streaming and figure out how to make their business work in other ways. And one of those ways is by going to social. So next I'm going to talk about this is our total addressable market for music creators. This is one of MIDiA's sort of prized reports where we talk about the total number of music creators globally. I only have the percentages here, but I'll talk you through the numbers. So the most interesting parts of this equation are the two bottom circles. So at the very bottom, 15% of the creators globally are actually self-releasing their music to streaming. And that's about 6.5 million people. So that's what we think of as the traditional music industry, artists that are releasing onto streaming. And this is the independent piece. Whereas when you look at the bigger circle behind that one, that's the number of artists that release their music directly to social platforms like TikTok, YouTube, also streaming services that have a social element like SoundCloud. And that number is 41.1 million, and it rose 32% year over year. So you compare those two, 6.5 million released to streaming themselves, growth of 15%, 41.1 million released to social, growth of 32%. So you might say, of course, well, there's always going to be more people in that sort of, maybe you consider them an amateur category or something, or people that are just starting out, that are only releasing their music online. And a lot of those are eventually going to self-release onto streaming as well. But what's really interesting to us here is just how much faster the segment that releases online is growing, right? It's growing at double the pace of those that are self-releasing to streaming. So this kind of shows us that there's this new generation of creators that don't necessarily see streaming as their natural first place to release music. And that's a really big shift, right? We're also starting to see this even with, if you think about some of the songs that have been popular lately or things that have gone viral, it tends to be that they're released first on social media. Think about the Drake and Kendrick Lamar rap battle. All of those songs went to social first, and most of them never ended up on streaming. So we're starting to enter this world where the hub for culture and music fandom is shifting away from streaming platforms and more to social media. So now that we know that from the creator side, let's talk about how a similar shift is also happening on the consumer side. So first I want to talk about music discovery after it, because to build fandom, to monetize fans, we need to get our music discovered in the first place. And these days, even just breaking through is often the hardest part for creators. So we asked consumers in our Q4 23 survey, which goes out to 9,000 people around the world. We asked them, after discovering a song or after discovering new music, what do you do next? So 43% said they listen to that song on repeat. That's pretty good. 42% said they go on to discover more music from that same artist. That's pretty good too, because sometimes we worry that, when people discover one song, focus is on the song and not the broader catalog of the artist. But only a quarter go on to actually discover the artist behind the music, which kind of shows how today so much of consumption and discovery and marketing is focused around singles and just songs, and being focused around building artist fans. Oh, thank you. Is that better? Is this on? Yeah, okay, great. So where was I? So 10% then go on to seek out a concert, which is kind of where, that's what a lot of artists eventually want, because that's where they're monetizing, right? So 10% go and seek out the concert. Now, you might look at these numbers and say, this actually isn't too bad. It's promising that 43% of people listen on repeat, 42% discover the catalog, even that 1 in 4 are discovering the artist. But I think we can do better. And I think that's partly because on both social and on streaming, the focus is still so much on the song, and there's not that much that you can learn in terms of context around the artists themselves. So what we find when we study fandom at MIDiA, and we do this through surveys, we do this through talking to fans, qualitative and quantitative research, is that the number one way that fandom develops is by learning more about an artist beyond their music, right? Learning about who they are as a person, learning about their personality, their sense of humor, their sense of style, style, all of these things that you don't get by listening to the music. But there aren't that many places to learn this context about the artist when you're on a streaming platform, beyond going to their about page or maybe looking at their photo. And there's not that much happening on social either, because most of the activity is around the songs and not the artists. So we start to be in a place where this sort of rainbow of activities is a bit limited. On most social platforms, you don't really go beyond that song. And on most streaming platforms, you don't really go beyond discovering the artist's catalog. So there's a lot of work, we think, to be done there. So now let's shift focus to this area of content creation that I've been sort of hinting at this whole presentation. So we ask every quarter how much time consumers estimate they spend on all these different activities, from listening to music to playing games. And here I've highlighted 3 of these activities: creating content, using social media, and streaming music. And what you're seeing is the comparison from Q4 2023 to Q4 2022, so a year-on-year comparison of what 16 to 19-year-olds, so what teenagers are saying they spend each week, how much time they spend on these activities. And you'll see that using social media and creating content are growing much faster than streaming music. And we're now in this place where it used to be that you could, scroll on Instagram while listening to music or whatever it was. But because social media is increasingly something you need the sound on for, because social video is so popular, we're in this place now where actually the time spent using social media and also the time spent creating content is actually competing for time spent streaming music. And people don't have much extra time in their days anymore. I mean, ask yourself if you have any extra time to spend on new activities. So the entertainment world is increasingly competitive, and content creation is beginning to become a competitor. The good news with that is that there are so many places that music is part of social media now and part of that content creation process. So we're in this era where it's more common for new generations to want to engage with music by creating their own content around it, whether that's a video or doing a cover, or now what we're seeing is even modifying the music itself. So it used to be that the way that music came into social media and content creation was mostly in the background of videos. But now consumers even want to remix and play around with the music itself. So this is the next iteration of the sort of content creation trend that we've been seeing. So this is some data that PEX shared with us. So PEX is a audio content ID company. And they shared the percentage of videos on each of these platforms that contains music that has been modified, either sped up, slowed down, had the pitch modified, things like that. And on TikTok in particular, this is a huge trend. 25% of content had the audio modified in 2022, rising to 38% in 2023. And this is all revenue that's getting diverted away from the music industry in most cases, because this isn't being done, with a license. And that is a conversation for another panel, another presentation. We could talk about that for hours, but we do think that if there's a way to monetize these fan creations and enable them and empower that can be a significant new source of revenue for the music industry. So the other thing about this is it's not as if 38% of users are modifying the audio. It's more that there's maybe a smaller subset of users that are super users who are modifying audio, uploading it to the platform, and then everyone else is using it. So then we wanted to, when we got this data back, the next question we had at MIDiA was, okay, how many people, though, are actually doing this behavior, and how many people want to? So we asked them. So in our consumer survey from Q1 2024, we asked consumers whether they'd be interested in all these different types of audio modification tools. And what you're seeing is the percentage who said, yes, this is something that I would be interested in. So on the left, in the gray, is the consumer average. Then you have the teenagers, so sort of the next generation. And on the right, you have music merch buyers. So I use music merch buyers just kind of as an example of what we think of when we think of superfans. So you'll see that even though this behavior is still pretty niche in the general population, there's early interest coming from the new generation and from superfans. And also, when we think about monetizing superfans, that's only ever going to be maybe 20% of consumers are superfans, right? So this is actually pretty good that this many people are interested in doing these types of activities with the music they're fans of. And if we can figure out a way to monetize that, this could be a significant new revenue stream. That is all another conversation that I would love to talk more about, but the main reason that I've brought all of this up is just to show that at the same time as creators are increasingly spending more of their efforts on social media, so are consumers in terms of how they actually engage with entertainment, including music. So both sides are sort of spending more and more time on social. Okay, so the last thing that I want to mention here in terms of the consumer shifts before we go into bifurcation theory is this idea of the pendulum of cultural change. So when big shifts in culture happen, they tend to happen in extreme shifts of the pendulum, whereas over time, the pendulum starts to fall back to a more logical middle ground. So we tend to see, at first, there's a huge extreme shift from one direction to the other, followed by a return to a more logical place, right? So this is what we've seen in the past 10 years. Between the pre-streaming era and the streaming era, we saw an extreme shift from everything being related to music being scarce to everything being on demand, everywhere, all at once. We saw a shift from a focus on IRL and physical experiences with music to everything being digital. A shift from a focus on artists to a focus on songs. A shift from a focus on fans to really just trying to scale audiences, even if that means they're listening passively. And also a major shift from human curation to algorithmic curation. So that's all happened in the past 10 years. What we're starting to see now, though, is audiences and consumers starting to want to go back a little bit in this pendulum, to not have such an extreme experience where everything is online. And we see that in their behaviors as well as in what people assign value to. So if you think about it, everything is available to you on demand, everything all at once, what starts to become valuable to you? It's actually scarce experiences. It's actually live in real life experiences that not everyone can have. And we also see that when we ask consumers about their willingness to spend money on things like artist subscriptions, where actually what they're willing to spend money on is things like exclusive access to music, exclusive access to tickets, because these are the things that are seen as valuable in this new everything everywhere all at once era. So this is just something to keep in mind as we talk about what's next for the industry, is we believe that we're starting to reach that settling of the pendulum now. Great, so where is all of this leading? So here's where we bring in bifurcation theory at last. So when you think about how this new generation of creators is often spending more time on social media than on streaming, and so is the new generation of consumers, we think that this is going to lead to a forking of the industry, a split, a bifurcation, where we end up with actually two parallel consumer worlds. The play world, which is more focused on social, and the listen world, which is more focused on streaming. So I'll go through each of these one by one, starting with listen, which is sort of the more traditional side of the industry. So this is the side that is focused on pure consumption, lean back listening, very streaming focused. And the focus is on the actual release of the song. It's not on, the fandom and all of these things leading up to it. And this is mostly happening on, the pure play streaming platforms, places like Spotify and Apple Music and Amazon Music. But then we see this new music world developing on social platforms where, remember that 41.1 million creators who are uploading music directly to social? This is the place where they see as the music industry, or where they're finding their fans, where they're finding their culture, rather than the listen side. So this is where we see these new tools for, fan remixing and audio modification and, fan challenges and all of these things happening. And here, what's interesting is that the focus is not so heavily on the release and the consumption of the music. It's on the creation, it's on the process, it's on how fans are engaged in that and how they recreate on top of it. So you might have an artist, going on one of these social platforms, talking about their process, bringing fans into it, allowing them to even make suggestions, as some have felt comfortable with, releasing the song, and then allowing fans to actually play around with it, post their own videos, remix the song themselves, things like that. And this is where sort of the fandom, culture, scenes, community, all of these things are. So the kind of ironic thing is that for the traditional industry, the industry that has been promoting this new shift to two-tier licensing, this is a little bit of what they might want to see. There's this idea that not everything should end up on streaming. There should maybe be these two separate spaces, one for the more professional artists and one for, the others. But we think that the risk for the traditional industry and for the incumbents is actually the new generations, both of creators and consumers, see the play side of things as their natural space to release in. And that's where the culture is happening. That's where the fandom is happening. So you end up at risk of kind of being left out of that equation. So the next thing I want to talk about with this is how even as we're seeing this shift happen and we're seeing this forking of the two sides, it's not as if I'm here to say that one side is better than the other. Actually, both have their own problematic elements to them. So on the listen side, of course, we don't always want the focus to be so much on lean back listening, because if that's the case, how are we going to generate fandom? And how are we going to monetize all these super fans that the industry speaks of? On the play side of things, it's also not perfect, because even though many more artists are spending more of their time and energy on social, they're doing that because at least this is a place where they can engage with their fans and maybe funnel them off to monetize with merch and with live tickets, but it's not as if anyone's making a lot of money through social either. So neither of these sides are really delivering on the monetization aspect. So it's not as if these two places, again, are where everything ends up forever. We actually think that there's an opportunity to make each side a lot better. So that's the next thing that I want to talk about. So on the play side, we came up with this sort of manifesto, nice little acronym here, of guiding principles for a new generation of more fan-centered music and platforms. And really the key in all of this is to give fans the tools to express their fandom through recreation, through co-creation, give them the ability to actually learn more about the artist beyond just listening to their music, learn more about who they are, become a bigger fan through those things. And just be more involved, be able to interact with each other as fans, be able to be more social and use music as a form of social expression the way that the new generation is starting to. So we actually came up with these sort of, these product ideas, I guess. We're not, product developers, so be easy on us. This is just, an illustrative piece here. But we think that there's an opportunity to have the social platforms be a lot more music focused and actually become the enabler for music rather than music being the enabler for social, which is the way that it is right now. So imagine if you could open your favorite social app and be able to see, sound packs from your favorite artists, be able to download those for $1.99, remix the song or speed up the song that you want to add to your post, and then post it. And be able to view maybe content from in-app subscriptions, like I was talking about, where we found that people actually are willing to subscribe for access to things that are exclusive to them. So these are different ways that we could think about the future of play. Of course, another thing that I could spend another hour talking about or another panel talking about is how for both the play and the listen sides, the reality is that music is a cost for these platforms, right? So that's part of the reason why it's hard to get to a place where social truly is the enabler for music rather than the other way around. But we think that there are ways to move in that direction, and these are some of them. We also had to think about how the listen side of the equation could be better. And essentially that has to do with the things I've been talking about around being able to understand the artist beyond their music, and also help consumers actually find what they want to listen to in this super oversaturated world of content. And that doesn't mean algorithmic playlists. We think that there's really a need to go back to some of the original, more human curation that was happening before everything became so algorithmic driven. Because as we talked about with the swinging of the pendulum, we're finding that that's something that people actually want, is to not just get their music recommendations from playlists or from faceless, nameless algorithms, but have these spaces that are more human curated. So you think of things like Boiler Room or NPR Tiny Desk. These are brands that have been really popular for having this sort of taste-making approach. And we think that's something that consumers are looking for today when the amount of content out there is pretty overwhelming. So before I wrap up, and we'll have time for a few questions if you'd like to discuss anything more. These are the key points. So if there's anything that you take away from today, this is what to take away. So number one, consumers increasingly want to play an active participatory role when engaging with the music that they're fans of. And that's driving them increasingly to social platforms rather than streaming, where they aren't able to have that same two-way interplay. Secondly, as more creators struggle to earn revenue and connect with their fans on streaming, they're also devoting more time to social as well, because at least this is a place where they can directly communicate with their fans. So the effect of this is that we see the industry bifurcating into two parallel consumer worlds: the listen world of lean back passive streaming, and the play world, which is the lean in active world of fandom. Now, we don't see these industries competing super directly with each other right now. They'll probably play out in parallel for a while, but eventually we think they will, because this new generation of creators, as we talked about, increasingly sees social as the first place to release music. And so the risk for incumbents is that as more artists see play, not listen, as their natural path, there's this need to, adapt and maintain relevance for that new generation. So this is all also in a report that we have at MIDiA. And if you're interested in learning more, you can find it at midiaresearch.com/bifurcation. There's also a general email there that you can reach out to if you'd like to chat more or see the report summary, which is available for free at that link. And yeah, we'll open it up to questions, and I'm also around after this if anyone wants to chat. So thank you for your time. Do we have any brave ones who have a question? I think they're coming around with a microphone.
I'm not sure how to put this, but I would say there's even like a third block besides the play and thing, which is more of a support area. I'm kind of questioning why you left out portals like Bandcamp or Patreon, because they are more focused on just like people giving money to artists they enjoy, and I don't know, it was kind of missing for me in the whole thing. So what's your view on those things?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think they definitely fit in probably a little bit towards the play side. There was a part on that slide that's it was sort of like a Venn diagram, I guess, and there was a part that had the overlap. So I would probably see something like Bandcamp fitting in the overlap, where it's still a place where you can have the lean back passive consumption, but you can also lean in and directly support artists and things like that. So I think it probably fits in the overlap. I would also say that platforms like Bandcamp are things that more so probably serve the superfan side of the equation. And part of what I was getting at here was more, what is the general average consumer doing? Where are they going to engage with music? And that's mostly, increasingly, those social platforms that we talked about. But I'm glad that you brought that up, because they definitely fit in. Patreon also has a place where, because so many artists are struggling to earn from streaming and having to diversify their revenue, they're going to experiment with places like Patreon. So definitely part of the equation. So thanks for bringing that up.
Thanks, Tatiana, for that. Question. One thing that spiked an interest was the scenes and niches that you had on there, and also the kind of percentage that you showed what's happening in that world. And I suppose this connects to the bifurcation aspect as well. But do you have any more kind of insights on where the scenes and niches might play a part as well in all this?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that scenes are something that we've done a lot of research on at MIDiA, and we think that, of course, scenes have always existed in music, right? We've always had, you think of like the punk scene or all of these scenes that have existed over the years. But what we see happening now as a result of all of those, that sort of cracks in the foundation slide earlier, is that scenes are becoming even more sort of niche. We're seeing where there used to be maybe, 5 or 10 major music scenes. Now there's hundreds, if not thousands. And so I guess what we think about that is it becomes, one, ever more important as an artist to be able to communicate who you are beyond your music, because that's what scenes are, right? It's not just about the sound of the music, it's about the ethos of that scene, it's about the community around it. And we see, I think, scenes and those niches as really important areas for artists to sort of market themselves within and grow. Because in a world where it's really hard to break through the noise, let alone sustain people's attention and interest, niches and scenes, members tend to be more engaged. So even though you may be reaching a smaller number of people, they're those people that are going to want to stick with you and become more important in this sort of world where we're trying to monetize core supporters and not just these massive streaming audiences. So I don't know if that answers your question. I rambled a little bit, but yeah, we definitely see it as a key part of this new industry. Cool. Well, thank you all for your time. Thanks for being here early. And like I said, I'm around if anyone wants to chat. So thanks.